The morning sun cast long shadows across the training compound as 23 recruits stood in formation, their boots creating small clouds of dust with each synchronized step. Among them was Marcus Chun, a 22-year-old computer science graduate who had joined the military against his family's wishes. His thick glasses and slight frame made him an easy target for jokes among the other recruits. But Marcus had something they didn't know about, an encyclopedic knowledge of military history that he kept mostly to himself. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez paced in front of the formation, his weathered face showing the strain of dealing with another batch of green recruits. The morning's exercise was identification training, where each soldier will be shown various military symbols, patches, and insignia to test their knowledge of Allied and enemy forces. Most recruits dreaded this exercise because it required memorization of hundreds of different markings from dozens of countries and organizations. "Today we separate the wheat from the chaff," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying across the dusty training ground. "You'll see symbols on that screen behind me. Some are friendly, some are hostile, some are obsolete. Your job is to identify what you're looking at and explain its significance. Get it wrong, and you're doing push-ups until I get tired of watching." The first few symbols were easy, basic NATO markings, standard unit patches, common enemy insignia that any recruit should recognize after 6 weeks of basic training. Rodriguez called on different soldiers randomly, and most managed to stumble through the obvious answers. Private Johnson correctly identified a Russian Spetsnaz patch. Private Williams recognized the British SAS insignia. The exercise seemed routine until Rodriguez clicked to a particular slide. The symbol that appeared on the screen was unlike anything most of the recruits had seen before. It showed a coiled black snake with fangs bared, set against a dark background with what appeared to be lightning bolts emanating from its eyes. The design was intricate, almost artistic, but carried an unmistakable sense of menace. The snake's body formed a perfect spiral, and small details in the background suggested mountains or rough terrain. Rodriguez looked around the formation with a slight smirk. "Anyone want to take a shot at this one?" The silence stretched for several seconds as recruits shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't in any of their study materials, and the unusual design made it impossible to guess based on standard military symbology. "Looks like some kind of video game logo," muttered Private Carter from the back row, drawing a few nervous chuckles from his neighbors. Rodriguez's expression darkened at the comment. "Something funny, Carter? You think this is entertainment?" Rodriguez's voice took on an edge that made several recruits straighten their postures. "This symbol has history, blood, and sacrifice behind it. Anyone else want to treat this like a joke?" The formation fell silent again. Rodriguez scanned the faces, clearly disappointed in the lack of response. His eyes settled on Marcus, who had been staring intently at the symbol since it appeared on screen. There was something familiar about the design, something that tugged at the edges of his memory from countless hours reading military history books and online forums. "Chun, you look like you're thinking hard over there. Want to share your thoughts with the class?" Marcus felt every eye in the formation turn toward him. His throat went dry as he studied the symbol more carefully. The snake design reminded him of something he'd read about elite units that operated in mountainous regions during the Cold War. The artistic quality suggested European origin, possibly from an organization that valued psychological warfare as much as conventional tactics. I think it might be from a special operations unit," Marcus said carefully, his voice barely carrying to the front of the formation. The snake's symbolism and the mountain background suggest alpine operations. The lightning bolts could indicate rapid deployment or strike capabilities. A few recruits snickered at what they perceived as overthinking a simple identification exercise. Rodriguez, however, stepped closer to Marcus with increased interest. "Go on. What else do you see?" Marcus pushed his glasses up his nose nervously. "The spiral pattern of the snake isn't random. It's designed to create a hypnotic effect, which suggests psychological operations. The color scheme, black on dark background, indicates stealth operations. This looks like it belongs to a unit that specialized in mountain warfare and psychological intimidation. Pretty detailed analysis for someone who's never seen it before, Rodriguez observed. You sure you don't recognize it specifically? Marcus shook his head. Not exactly, Sergeant. But the design elements follow patterns used by European special forces during the 1960s and 70s. The artistic quality suggests it wasn't just a standard military patch, but something custom-made for a very specific unit. More chuckles rippled through the formation. Private Johnson turned to whisper something to the recruit next to him about know-it-all college boys, but Rodriguez silenced them with a sharp look. Interesting theory, Chun. Anyone else have thoughts before I give you the answer? Private Martinez raised his hand tentatively. Maybe it's from some disbanded unit, like something that doesn't exist anymore. Could be a training symbol, suggested Private Thompson. Something made up for exercises? Rodriguez nodded slowly, clearly enjoying the speculation. All reasonable guesses. The truth is, most of you will never need to know what this symbol represents. It belongs to an organization that operates in shadows, handles situations that never make the news, and recruits from the absolute best of the best. He clicked to the next slide, which showed a cleaner version of the same symbol alongside a simple text description. Classification: restricted. Historical significance: active 1962 to 1987. Current status: unknown. That's all the information you're cleared to see, Rodriguez announced. Moving on to the next symbol. But Marcus couldn't move on. Something about the Black Viper symbol, as it was apparently called, nagged at him throughout the rest of the exercise. The date range troubled him. 1962 to 1987 covered some of the most intense years of the Cold War, including conflicts in Southeast Asia, Central America, and various covert operations around the globe. A unit that operated for 25 years without public acknowledgement must have been involved in significant events. After the exercise ended and the recruits were dismissed for lunch, Marcus lingered near the training facility, pretending to tie his boots while actually hoping to catch Rodriguez alone. His curiosity about the symbol had evolved into genuine fascination, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Rodriguez emerged from the building carrying a folder of training materials. He spotted Marcus immediately and walked over with an expression that was equal parts amused and exasperated. Let me guess, Chun. You want to know more about the Black Viper? Yes, Sergeant. I've been thinking about what you said, about it being restricted information. If it's historical, why the secrecy? Most Cold War operations have been declassified by now. Rodriguez studied Marcus for a long moment, as if weighing something in his mind. You know, Chun, most recruits forget about these symbols the moment they leave the classroom. They're focused on graduation, on their next assignment, on proving themselves in ways that matter for their immediate future. What makes you different? Marcus considered the question seriously. I think understanding history helps us avoid repeating mistakes. If there's something to learn from this Black Viper unit, even if it's classified, maybe knowing it existed makes us better soldiers. Better soldiers, Rodriguez repeated thoughtfully. That's an interesting way to put it. He glanced around to make sure they were alone, then lowered his voice. Tell me, Chun, what do you know about Operation Snake Charmer? Marcus shook his head. I've never heard of it. Most people haven't. It was a joint operation between American and European Special Forces in 1978. The mission involved extracting a high-value target from behind enemy lines in a mountainous region. The operation was successful, but the unit that carried it out was never officially acknowledged. Rodriguez paused, watching Marcus's reaction carefully. The thing is, Chun, success in that operation required a very specific set of skills. Mountain warfare expertise, psychological operations capability, and the ability to operate independently for extended periods without support. Sound familiar? Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The Black Viper unit. I didn't say that, Rodriguez replied quickly. But I will say this. Sometimes the most important military history isn't found in textbooks. Sometimes it's carried in the memories of people who were there, who saw things that couldn't be written down, who participated in events that shaped the world in ways most people will never know. Rodriguez started walking toward the mess hall, and Marcus fell into step beside him. The conversation felt like it was moving into territory that exceeded a staff sergeant's normal interaction with recruits, but Marcus sensed an opportunity to learn something truly significant. "Sergeant, you said the unit's current status is unknown. Does that mean it might still be active?" Rodriguez stopped walking and fixed Marcus with a penetrating stare. "Chin, what I'm about to tell you stays between us." "Understood." Marcus nodded eagerly. The Black Viper symbol hasn't been seen in official military channels since 1987, but there have been incidents over the years. Situations where the methods used, the precision of execution, the psychological impact, it all bears the hallmarks of Black Viper operations. The thing is, there's no unit by that name on any current roster. So either they changed their name, or they operate completely outside normal military structure, Marcus concluded. Or, Rodriguez said quietly, they never really disbanded. They just went deeper underground. Marcus felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sun. The idea of a special operations unit that had been active for potentially 60 years without public acknowledgement was both thrilling and terrifying. Such an organization would have participated in every major conflict and covert operation since the early Cold War. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. Rodriguez resumed walking, but his pace was slower now, more thoughtful. "Because, Chun, in 37 years of military service, I've learned to recognize certain qualities in people. Most soldiers follow orders, complete missions, and serve honorably within the system. But a few have the combination of intelligence, curiosity, and discretion that makes them valuable for other purposes." They reached the entrance to the mess hall, where the sounds of hundreds of recruits eating lunch created a wall of background noise that would mask their conversation from casual eavesdropping. "There's someone I want you to meet," Rodriguez said suddenly. "Someone who might be able to answer the questions you're really asking. But first, I need to know if you're serious about wanting answers, or if this is just academic curiosity." Marcus thought about his motivation carefully. The truth was, he'd always felt like he was meant for something more than a standard military career. His academic background and analytical skills seemed wasted on routine training exercises and basic military tasks. The possibility of learning about truly significant operations, of maybe even participating in work that mattered on a global scale, appealed to him enormously. "I'm serious, Sergeant. I want to understand what real military service looks like at the highest levels." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Good answer. There's someone visiting the base tomorrow. A colonel who's been involved in some very interesting projects over the years. I think you two should have a conversation." As they entered the mess hall, Marcus's mind raced with possibilities. The casual conversation about a mysterious symbol had evolved into something that felt like the beginning of a recruitment process. The idea both excited and intimidated him. Whatever happened next, he had the feeling that his military career was about to take a very different direction than he'd originally planned. The afternoon training sessions passed in a blur as Marcus struggled to focus on basic combat techniques, while his mind kept returning to the Black Viper symbol and Rodriguez's cryptic comments about the colonel's visit. He found himself studying his fellow recruits with new eyes, wondering if any of them had shown similar curiosity about the mysterious symbol, if any of them might be having similar conversations with their instructors. That evening, as Marcus lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, he realized that everything about his military experience was about to change. The question was whether he was ready for whatever came next. The next morning arrived with unusual tension in the air. Marcus noticed Rodriguez speaking quietly with several other instructors before formation, their body language suggesting something important was happening. During the routine morning briefing, Rodriguez announced that normal training would be suspended at 1,400 hours for a special presentation by visiting personnel. Marcus tried to concentrate on the morning's weapons training, but his mind kept drifting to the promised meeting with the mysterious colonel. His marksmanship scores reflected his distraction, earning him sharp criticism from the range instructor and curious glances from fellow recruits who were accustomed to his normally precise performance. "What's wrong with you today, Chin?" asked Private Williams during the lunch break. "You look like you were somewhere else entirely out there." Marcus forced a casual shrug. "Just tired, I guess. Stayed up too late reading." Williams laughed. "Reading what? We don't exactly have a library here. Military history stuff on my phone," Marcus replied, which was close enough to the truth to be believable. He had spent much of the previous evening researching everything he could find online about Cold War special operations, looking for any references to snake symbols or units that might match Rodriguez's hints. His research had yielded frustratingly little concrete information. There were vague references to classified operations in mountainous regions, mentions of psychological warfare units that had no official designation, and several forum discussions about mysterious military symbols that seemed to appear and disappear from historical records without explanation. The more he searched, the more convinced he became that Rodriguez had been telling the truth about the Black Viper's secretive nature. At precisely 1,400 hours, the recruits assembled in the base's main auditorium, a facility normally used for large briefings and ceremonial events. Marcus noticed several officers he didn't recognize seated in the front row, their uniforms bearing insignia that suggested special operations backgrounds. Rodriguez stood near the stage, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something that looked almost like nervousness. A side door opened, and a tall figure in an immaculate dress uniform entered the auditorium. Colonel Sarah Mitchell moved with the fluid precision of someone accustomed to command, her graying hair pulled back in a regulation style that couldn't quite hide her sharp intelligence. What struck Marcus immediately was her presence. She commanded attention without saying a word, and the entire auditorium fell silent as she approached the podium. "Good afternoon," Colonel Mitchell began, her voice carrying easily to the back of the room. "You may be wondering why your training has been interrupted for this presentation. The answer is simple. Some of you have demonstrated qualities that merit special attention." She clicked a remote control, and a large screen behind her displayed the seal of the United States Army Special Operations Command. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he recognized the significance of the organization. Special Operations Forces represent less than 3% of the total military, Mitchell continued. "We handle missions that conventional forces cannot or will not undertake. We operate in environments where failure is not an option and success cannot be publicly acknowledged. Today, I'm here to discuss opportunities that most soldiers will never see." The presentation that followed covered the history and mission of various special operations units, from the well-known Rangers and Green Berets to more obscure organizations that Mitchell described in only general terms. Marcus found himself studying her carefully, looking for any indication that this was connected to his conversation with Rodriguez about the Black Viper symbol. The nature of modern warfare has evolved dramatically since the end of the Cold War, Mitchell explained as the presentation moved into more recent developments. Today's threats require operators who can think independently, adapt quickly to changing circumstances, and maintain operational security under the most challenging conditions. She paused and seemed to scan the audience, her gaze lingering on several recruits, including Marcus. "Some of you may have encountered symbols or references during your training that raise questions. This is intentional. We believe that intellectual curiosity, combined with discretion, indicates potential for advanced responsibilities." Marcus felt as if she was speaking directly to him. The reference to symbols could hardly be a coincidence, especially given Rodriguez's promise to arrange this meeting. Following this presentation, certain individuals will be approached for additional discussions. These conversations are voluntary, but I encourage anyone invited to participate seriously. The opportunities we're prepared to discuss do not come along often. The formal presentation concluded with an overview of special operations training pipelines and career progression paths. Mitchell answered a few general questions from the audience, then dismissed the recruits back to their regular training schedule. As the auditorium began to empty, Rodriguez appeared at Marcus's elbow. "Chun, you're requested to remain behind." Marcus's heart rate accelerated as he watched his fellow recruits file out of the auditorium, some casting curious glances in his direction. Within minutes, only Marcus, Rodriguez, and Colonel Mitchell remained in the large space. Mitchell approached Marcus directly, studying him with an analytical gaze that made him feel as if he were being evaluated for qualities he couldn't even identify. "Private Chun, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, tells me you showed unusual interest in a particular symbol during identification training. Can you tell me why?" Marcus chose his words carefully. The design elements suggested a highly specialized unit with specific operational capabilities. "I was curious about the historical context and whether there were lessons to be learned from their methods. And what conclusions did you draw from your analysis?" That it represented an organization focused on psychological warfare and mountain operations, probably European-influenced, active during a critical period of the Cold War. The restricted classification suggested ongoing operational significance despite the historical date range. Mitchell nodded approvingly. "A thoughtful analysis. What would you say if I told you that the Black Viper unit is not entirely historical?" Marcus felt his breath catch. "I would ask what their current mission involves and whether there are opportunities for someone with my background to contribute." Interesting answer. Most people would ask about the secrecy or want to know details about past operations. You're thinking about the future. Mitchell gestured toward a small conference room adjacent to the auditorium. "Let's sit down and have a more detailed conversation." The conference room was spartanly furnished with a simple table and chairs. Mitchell closed the door behind them and activated what Marcus assumed was some kind of signal-blocking device, given the subtle electronic hum that began when she pressed a switch on the wall. "What I'm about to share with you is classified at levels you don't currently have clearance to access," Mitchell began. "However, given the nature of this conversation, certain disclosures are necessary. Do you understand that everything discussed here is to remain absolutely confidential?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am. The organization you identified as the Black Viper has indeed operated continuously since 1962, though under various designations and cover identities. Their primary mission has evolved from Cold War intelligence gathering to modern counterterrorism and strategic intervention. They handle situations that require complete deniability and specialized expertise that doesn't exist elsewhere in the military." She paused to let this information sink in. Marcus struggled to process the implications of a special operations unit that had been active for over 60 years without public acknowledgement. Currently, the organization operates as a joint initiative involving American, Canadian, and European special forces. They recruit exclusively from existing military personnel who have demonstrated specific qualities: exceptional analytical ability, cultural adaptability, language skills, and what we call operational creativity, the ability to solve complex problems with limited resources. "What kind of problems?" Marcus asked. "The kind that can't be solved through conventional military action. Hostage situations involving high-value targets. Counterintelligence operations in hostile territories. Intervention in conflicts that officially don't exist. Prevention of terrorist attacks that could destabilize entire regions." Mitchell leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more intense. "Private Chun, your academic background in computer science, combined with your demonstrated analytical skills and evident discretion, makes you a candidate for consideration. However, I need you to understand what that means." She opened a folder that Marcus hadn't noticed her carrying and removed several documents. "If you choose to pursue this path, your official military record will show a transfer to a routine intelligence analysis position. Your family and friends will believe you're working a desk job somewhere safe. In reality, you'll undergo 18 months of the most intensive training any military organization provides." Marcus studied the documents she'd placed on the table. They appear to be standard transfer papers, but the destination unit was listed only as Special Analysis Division, with a post office box address. The training covers everything from advanced weapons handling and demolitions to psychological operations and deep cover identity construction. You'll learn languages, cultural immersion techniques, and combat methods that aren't taught anywhere else. The failure rate exceeds 70%. What happens to the people who fail? They're transferred to appropriate regular military positions with their security clearances intact, but with no memory of what they attempted to qualify for. The training includes psychological conditioning that ensures operational security even from failed candidates. Marcus felt a chill at the implications of that statement. Memory modification? Let's call it selective amnesia. It's reversible, but it ensures that people who aren't suited for this level of operation can't compromise ongoing missions through casual conversation or poor judgment. Mitchell gathered the documents back into her folder. I want to be completely clear about what you're considering. Success in this program means a career unlike anything most people can imagine. You'll participate in operations that shape global events. You'll work with the best-trained professionals in the world. You'll have resources and support that most military personnel never see. She paused, her expression becoming grave. You'll also face dangers that can't be quantified, in locations that can't be acknowledged, fighting enemies who won't hesitate to torture and kill you in ways specifically designed to maximize psychological impact. Your life expectancy will be statistically shorter than conventional military service. Marcus absorbed this information silently. The opportunity she was describing exceeded his wildest expectations for his military career, but the risks were clearly enormous. How long do I have to decide? 72 hours. If you choose to proceed, you'll receive new orders next week that will transfer you immediately to the training facility. If you decline, this conversation never happened, and you'll continue with your current training pipeline. Mitchell stood, indicating that the meeting was concluding. Private Chun, I've had similar conversations with thousands of military personnel over the years. Most are attracted to the excitement or the prestige. A few understand the genuine significance of the work. You strike me as someone who grasps both the opportunity and the responsibility. As they walked back toward the main corridor, Mitchell made one final comment that would echo in Marcus's mind for the next 3 days. The Black Viper symbol represents more than just a military unit. It represents a commitment to operations that exist in the spaces between what's publicly known and what's genuinely necessary. If that appeals to you, we'll speak again soon. Marcus spent the rest of the day mechanically completing training exercises while his mind processed the morning's revelations. The existence of such an organization answered many questions about how certain global events had unfolded, but it raised even more questions about the nature of modern warfare and international relations. That evening, he found himself staring at his phone, considering calling his parents or his girlfriend back home. But how could he explain that he was contemplating a career path that he couldn't describe, in an organization that didn't officially exist, performing missions that would never be acknowledged? The weight of the decision pressed down on him as he realized that accepting Mitchell's offer would fundamentally change not just his career, but his entire identity. The question was whether he had the courage to embrace that transformation. The 72 hours Colonel Mitchell had given Marcus felt simultaneously endless and far too brief. During the day, he went through the motions of regular training, but his fellow recruits began to notice his distracted behavior. Private Williams cornered him after evening chow on the second day. "Okay, Chin, what's going on? Ever since that special presentation, you've been acting like you're somewhere else entirely. Did something happen during that meeting you had to stay for?" Marcus had prepared for this question, but lying to people he'd grown to consider friends felt more difficult than he'd expected. Just some additional counseling about career paths. Nothing dramatic. Williams didn't look convinced. Career paths that require 2 days of deep thinking? Come on, man. We're all going to the same places after basic training. How complicated could it be? The irony of Williams's statement struck Marcus powerfully. His fellow recruits had no idea that some military careers involved operations that couldn't be discussed, units that didn't officially exist, and missions that shaped world events from the shadows. The gap between what they assumed military service involved and what Mitchell had described felt enormous. That night, Marcus lay in his bunk, conducting a mental inventory of everything that would change if he accepted the offer. His family expected him to serve his commitment and return home to a normal civilian career. His girlfriend Sarah had been supportive of his military service specifically because she believed it was temporary and would provide good experience for his eventual return to the technology sector. How could he explain to any of them that he was considering a path that might last decades, involve constant travel to undisclosed locations, and require maintaining a false identity even with the people closest to him? The psychological burden of such deception seemed almost as daunting as the physical dangers Mitchell had described. On the final morning before his deadline, Marcus woke before reveille and walked to the training facility's observation deck, a small balcony overlooking the base's main compound. The pre-dawn darkness gradually gave way to the first hints of sunrise, and he found himself thinking about the bigger picture of global security that Mitchell had outlined. Conventional military service involved protecting American interests through established, acknowledged means. What Mitchell was offering was participation in protecting global stability through methods that operated outside normal diplomatic and military channels. The moral complexity of such work appealed to his analytical mind, even as it intimidated his sense of personal ethics. Rodriguez appeared beside him without announcement, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the mess hall. "Figured you might be up here," Rodriguez said, offering Marcus one of the cups. Big decisions have a way of driving people to high places. Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully. "How did you know I'd be struggling with this?" "Because 23 years ago, I had the same conversation with the same colonel." "Well, she was a major then, but it was the same offer, the same timeline, the same questions eating away at my sleep." This revelation surprised Marcus. "You were recruited for the Black Viper organization?" Rodriguez shook his head. "I was offered the opportunity." "Ich chose differently." He stared out over the base, his expression thoughtful. "I had a wife, a young daughter. The idea of disappearing into a world where I couldn't tell them what I really did, where every phone call home might be my last communication with them, seemed like too high a price." "Do you regret that decision?" "Sometimes. I've had a good career, served honorably, made a difference in ways I can measure and discuss. But I've also watched world events unfold and wondered if things might have gone differently if people like me had been working behind the scenes to prevent conflicts before they started." Rodriguez turned to face Marcus directly. "The thing is, Chun, there are thousands of people like me in the military, competent, dedicated, willing to serve within the established system. There are very few people with the combination of skills and temperament needed for what Mitchell's organization does. The question you need to answer is whether you want to be part of conventional military service or something that operates at a completely different level." Marcus sipped his coffee while considering Rodriguez's perspective. "What can you tell me about the people who do accept? Do you stay in touch with any of them?" "That's the thing. Once they enter that world, they effectively cease to exist in their previous lives. I've encountered a few over the years, but they can't acknowledge our shared history or discuss their current activities. It's like they become ghosts who occasionally intersect with the regular military world." The implications of this isolation hadn't fully occurred to Marcus before. Accepting Mitchell's offer wouldn't just change his career. It would fundamentally alter his relationship with everyone he'd ever known. How do they handle the psychological pressure of that kind of isolation? The ones who succeed develop a different kind of identity, built around the mission rather than personal relationships. They form bonds with their team members that are closer than family, because those people become the only ones who truly understand their world. Rodriguez finished his coffee and prepared to leave for morning formation. "Chun, whatever you decide, make sure it's based on what you genuinely want to contribute to the world, not on excitement about adventure or prestige. The work Mitchell's organization does is too important for people who aren't completely committed." The morning training session involved urban combat simulations, and Marcus found himself analyzing the exercise from a new perspective. The scenarios they were practicing, room clearing, hostage rescue, target identification under stress, suddenly seemed like basic preparation for much more complex operations. He began to understand why Mitchell's organization recruited from existing military personnel rather than training civilians from scratch. During the lunch break, Marcus made a decision about how to approach his final conversation with Mitchell. Rather than focusing on his own desires or concerns, he would frame his interest around what he could contribute to the organization's mission. The analytical skills that had initially attracted their attention needed to be demonstrated through careful consideration of their operational requirements. At exactly 1,400 hours, Marcus reported to the conference room where he'd first met with Mitchell. She was already seated at the table, reviewing a file that she closed when he entered. "Private Chun, have you reached a decision?" "Yes, ma'am. But first, I have a question about operational methodology." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." The Black Viper organization operates across multiple nations and handles situations that require complete deniability. That suggests a level of international cooperation that goes beyond normal military alliances. How do you maintain operational security when working with personnel from different countries who have different training backgrounds and security protocols? Mitchell smiled for the first time since Marcus had met her. That's exactly the kind of question that indicates you understand the complexity of what we do. The answer is that we don't simply cooperate with foreign units. We create integrated teams where nationality becomes irrelevant. Our training is designed to produce operators who can function effectively regardless of their original military background. Which means the 18-month training program you described isn't just about learning new skills. It's about creating a completely new professional identity. Precisely. The psychological conditioning I mentioned earlier isn't just about security. It's about developing the mental flexibility to operate effectively in any cultural or operational environment. Marcus nodded slowly. "In that case, I'd like to volunteer for the program. My decision is based on the conviction that the analytical and technical skills I could develop will contribute meaningfully to global security operations that can't be handled through conventional means." Mitchell opened her file and removed a document that looked like standard military transfer orders. "These will take effect Monday. You'll report to Fort Huachuca in Arizona for what your official records will show as advanced intelligence analysis training. Your actual destination will be communicated after you arrive." She handed him a pen and indicated a signature line at the bottom of the orders. "Private Chun, once you sign this document, there's no way to reverse your decision. The training will either qualify you for a career unlike anything most people can imagine, or it will prepare you for a conventional military intelligence position with no memory of this conversation." Marcus read through the orders carefully, noting that they contained no specific unit designation or detailed assignment information. Everything about his future would be determined by his performance during training that was apparently designed to test limits he couldn't even anticipate. He signed his name with steady handwriting, feeling as if he was crossing a threshold into a completely different life. "Excellent," Mitchell said, collecting the paperwork. "You'll finish the week here with your current unit, then take a long weekend of leave before reporting to your new assignment. I suggest you use that time to have whatever personal conversations feel necessary, because your communication with family and friends will be significantly limited during training." As Mitchell prepared to leave, Marcus realized he had one more question that had been nagging at him since their first conversation. "Colonel, why is the organization called Black Viper? Is there significance to that specific symbol?" Mitchell paused at the door, her expression becoming almost nostalgic. The original unit was formed during a joint operation in the Swiss Alps in 1962. The team was trapped by enemy forces in a mountain cave system for 6 days. When they finally escaped, they discovered that the cave was home to a species of black viper that was thought to be extinct. The snakes had been living in the depths of the mountain, invisible to the outside world, but perfectly adapted to survive in conditions that would kill almost anything else. She opened the door, then turned back to Marcus with a slight smile. The symbolism seemed appropriate for an organization that would spend the next 60 years operating invisibly in some of the world's most dangerous environments. After Mitchell left, Marcus sat alone in the conference room, processing the magnitude of what he'd just committed to. The Black Viper organization represented a level of military service that most people would never know existed, handling crises that could determine the fate of nations while remaining completely hidden from public view. The next few days passed in a strange suspension between his current life and the unknown future awaiting him. His fellow recruits noticed his improved mood, but attributed it to excitement about approaching graduation from basic training. Marcus found it increasingly difficult to relate to their discussions about conventional military assignments and career plans. On his final evening at the base, Rodriguez approached him after evening formation. "Chen, I don't know what decision you made, and I don't need to know, but I want you to understand something important. Whatever path you're taking next, remember that the best military service comes from people who maintain their own moral compass, even when following orders. Don't lose sight of who you are just because you're becoming someone new." Marcus shook Rodriguez's hand, knowing this would likely be their last conversation, but unable to acknowledge that fact directly. "Thank you, Sergeant, for everything." As Marcus packed his belongings that night, preparing for the leave period before his transfer, he reflected on how fundamentally his perspective on military service had changed in just a few weeks. The young man who had entered basic training to fulfill a service obligation and gain useful experience was about to become someone entirely different. The transformation had already begun. The weekend leave Marcus spent at home proved more emotionally challenging than anything he'd experienced during basic training. Sitting in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by familiar objects and family photos, he struggled to reconcile his decision with the normal life everyone expected him to return to after his military service. His parents had planned a small celebration dinner, inviting extended family and friends to welcome him home and hear about his training experiences. Marcus found himself telling carefully edited stories about military life while mentally cataloging everything he would soon have to leave behind permanently. His girlfriend Sarah sensed something different about him immediately. During a quiet moment on Saturday evening, she confronted him directly. "Marcus, you're acting like you're already gone again. What's wrong? Is there something about your next assignment you're not telling me?" The question struck at the heart of his internal conflict. Sarah deserved honesty, but the truth was impossible to share. Even attempting to explain his situation would violate the security commitments he'd made. "It's just military life is different from what I expected. I'm still processing everything I've learned." Sarah studied his face carefully. "That's not an answer. You look like someone who's made a decision that he can't talk about. Are you in some kind of trouble?" Marcus realized that his attempts to maintain normalcy were actually drawing more attention to his changed situation. The training to compartmentalize his thoughts and emotions had apparently begun before he'd even left basic training. "I'm not in trouble, but you're right that I've been given some opportunities that I can't discuss in detail. The next phase of my service is going to be more demanding than what I originally planned." "More demanding how? Different location? Longer commitment?" "Marcus, we've been talking about our future together. I have a right to know if that's changing." The conversation continued late into the evening, with Sarah growing increasingly frustrated by Marcus's inability to provide specific information about his plans. By Sunday morning, she had reached her own conclusions about their relationship. "I can't be with someone who won't trust me with basic information about his life," she said during what both of them knew would be their final conversation. "Whatever you've gotten yourself into, it's clear that there's no room in it for the kind of partnership I want." Marcus watched Sarah walk away, knowing that she was right, but unable to change the circumstances that made their relationship impossible to continue. The personal cost of his decision was becoming concrete in ways that Mitchell's warnings hadn't fully prepared him for. His parents were equally puzzled by his evasive responses to questions about his future assignments. His mother sensed that something significant was changing, but couldn't identify what was different about her son's demeanor. "You seem older somehow," she observed on Sunday evening. "Like you've seen things that change your perspective on everything else." Marcus realized that the psychological transformation Rodriguez had described was already affecting his interactions with civilians. The concerns and conversations that had seemed important just months earlier now felt removed from the realities of global security and international conflict. Monday morning arrived with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Reporting to Fort Huachuca felt like stepping through a doorway into his new life, while leaving home felt like a necessary but painful amputation from his previous identity. The intelligence analysis training facility at Fort Huachuca maintained the appearance of a conventional military school, but Marcus noticed subtle details that suggested additional purposes. Security was more comprehensive than typical military installations, and several buildings were unmarked or identified only with numeric designations. Marcus reported to the administration building as instructed in his orders, where a staff sergeant reviewed his paperwork and directed him to a briefing room on the third floor. The elevator required a key card that the sergeant provided with instructions to return it after the briefing. The briefing room contained only a table, chairs, and a large monitor displaying the seal of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Marcus waited alone for several minutes before a door he hadn't noticed opened, and Colonel Mitchell entered, accompanied by a man in civilian clothes who introduced himself as Dr. William Park. "Welcome to your new assignment, Private Chun," Mitchell said. "Dr. Park will be conducting your initial evaluation and orientation." Dr. Park was a soft-spoken man in his 50s whose casual demeanor contrasted sharply with Mitchell's military bearing. He opened a folder and began reviewing what appeared to be extensive biographical information about Marcus. "According to your file, you speak Mandarin Chinese and have some exposure to Spanish. You have a computer science degree with emphasis on cybersecurity. You scored in the 98th percentile on analytical reasoning tests. Most importantly, you've demonstrated discretion and intellectual curiosity that exceed normal parameters." Dr. Park closed the folder and studied Marcus directly. "The question we need to answer over the next several weeks is whether those qualities translate into the specific capabilities required for advanced operations. The training you're about to begin will test you in ways that academic or even basic military preparation cannot anticipate." Mitchell interjected, "Dr. Park oversees the psychological preparation component of our program. His job is to determine whether candidates have the mental flexibility to function effectively under the extreme conditions they'll encounter in the field." "What kind of conditions?" Marcus asked. Dr. Park smiled slightly. "Identity fluidity, moral ambiguity, social isolation, physical danger, and decision-making under stress that could affect thousands of lives. Most people discover that they have psychological limits they never knew existed." Mitchell handed Marcus a new set of documents. "These are your housing assignments and training schedule for the next month. After that, if you're still in the program, you'll be transferred to the primary training facility." Marcus scanned the schedule, noting training sessions and subjects he'd never encountered: advanced language immersion, cultural psychology, stress inoculation, and something called operational identity construction. "The other candidates in your cohort have similar backgrounds to yours," Dr. Park explained. "Military personnel from various specialties who showed potential for advanced work. You'll be training together, but also competing for limited positions in the final program." This was the first mention Marcus had heard of competition among candidates. "How many people typically qualify?" "Of the 12 candidates beginning training this month, we expect 3 or 4 to complete the full program successfully," Mitchell replied. "The others will be transferred to appropriate conventional assignments with no negative impact on their careers." As Mitchell and Dr. Park prepare to leave, Dr. Park made one final comment that would frame Marcus's understanding of everything that followed. "Private Chun, the most important thing to remember during training is that success depends not on being the strongest or smartest person in the group, but on being the most adaptable. The situations you'll face in the field require people who can completely reinvent themselves while maintaining absolute loyalty to the mission." Marcus spent the remainder of the day completing administrative processing and moving into his assigned quarters, a small but comfortable room in a building that housed other training candidates. His neighbors introduced themselves with names and military backgrounds, but Marcus noticed that conversations about their previous assignments remained surprisingly vague. His roommate was David Martinez, a former Marine intelligence specialist who had volunteered for the program after serving in Afghanistan. David's experience with combat operations and cross-cultural work made him an obvious candidate, but Marcus wondered what had specifically attracted the Black Viper organization's attention. "So what convinced you to volunteer for this?" Marcus asked during their first evening together. David considered the question carefully. "I realized during my deployment that the biggest threats to global stability operate outside the conventional military framework. Terrorist networks, international crime syndicates, rogue state actors, they all exploit the gaps between what different countries' militaries can legally do. If there's an organization that can work in those gaps effectively, I want to be part of it." Marcus found David's motivation similar to his own, but expressed with the confidence of someone who had already seen combat and understood the realities of modern conflict. Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the building's intercom system. "All training candidates report to Conference Room A for orientation briefing. Bring notebooks and be prepared for an extended session." Conference Room A contained a dozen other candidates representing various branches of the military and intelligence services. Marcus recognized the signs of elite selection. Every person in the room projected the confidence and analytical capability that had attracted the organization's attention. Dr. Park entered with several assistants carrying boxes of materials. "Good evening. Over the next 4 weeks, you'll receive intensive preparation in the foundational skills required for advanced operations. Some of you will discover that this career path suits your abilities and temperament perfectly. Others will realize that your talents are better applied elsewhere." He began distributing thick training manuals to each candidate. "The material you're receiving covers the theoretical framework for what you'll be learning. I suggest you review it carefully, because tomorrow morning we begin practical exercises that assume complete familiarity with these concepts." Marcus opened his manual to find sections on psychological operations theory, cross-cultural intelligence gathering, advanced communication security, and identity management in hostile environments. The complexity and sophistication of the curriculum exceeded anything he'd encountered during his academic or military training. "Questions?" Dr. Park asked. A candidate from the Air Force raised her hand. "What happens if someone decides during training that they want to withdraw from the program?" "Withdrawal is always voluntary," Dr. Park replied. "However, it requires a debriefing process that ensures operational security. Former candidates are transferred to positions where their skills can be effectively utilized within conventional military structure." Marcus understood that this was a diplomatic way of describing the memory modification Mitchell had mentioned earlier. The psychological conditioning would ensure that people who learned too much about the organization's methods but didn't qualify for operational status couldn't compromise ongoing missions. The evening briefing concluded with assignment of study partners and initial training schedules. Marcus found himself partnered with David Martinez and a Navy intelligence specialist named Jennifer Park, whose surname similarity to Dr. Park's was apparently coincidental. As the candidates dispersed to their quarters, Marcus realized that his transformation from regular military service member to potential Black Viper operative had officially begun. The young man who had been curious about a mysterious symbol just weeks earlier was about to undergo training that would either prepare him for some of the world's most challenging missions or demonstrate that he wasn't suited for such work. Either way, there was no path back to the life he'd left behind. The Black Viper organization had claimed him completely, and his only choice now was to prove worthy of the opportunities they offered. That night, as Marcus studied the training materials and prepared for the challenges ahead, he thought about Rodriguez's advice to maintain his moral compass regardless of the orders he might receive. The irony wasn't lost on him that developing the ability to assume completely false identities would require maintaining absolute clarity about his true values and commitments. The real training was about to begin.